Many of you were probably shocked when the news broke that Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau was fired yesterday. After all, he had just led a Knicks resurgence the likes we hadn't seen for over 20 years. But it's hard not to ignore some of the things that have hounded him his whole career. He doesn't adjust, he's too rigid, he wears out his welcome. Certainly, the incessant bellowing at his players and constant negative body language either keeps his guys accountable or prohibits them from finding another gear, or both. While we now understand that playing in a positive frame of mind is the key to unlocking true potential, Tibbs has thrived as a coach by practically forcing his players to bear down, concentrate, and give out a ton of effort. But there can easily be a limit to how far a team can go under this type of leadership. And there's no question this statement by the Knicks indicated that they felt strongly that there was a hard ceiling he put on the team. One issue is his inability to create optimal lineups. He is famous for overplaying his starters to the point where they break down by the end of the season. They avoided the injuries this year, thankfully, but if we dig a little deeper, there's another cost to not using more of your players. Without enough reps, those bench guys don't develop as much both skill-wise and chemistry with your starters. Also, with less permutations of your lineups, it's easier for opposing coaches to scheme their defenses to stop you. And this all adds up to expecting your players to make a lot of difficult shots. When you're talking about one play here and there that can decide a series, the team that can exploit mismatches better has a big advantage. Instead, we saw a 5-point drop in offensive rating by relying heavily on the individual brilliance of Jalen Brunson. It's not a bad strategy to lean more heavily on your top guy in the playoffs, but it came at the expense of Karl Anthony Towns' production. You can see the drop in field goal attempts and usage, and here's why that becomes a problem. Defense. With Cat, he's got a huge target on his back as teams throughout the playoffs brought him up into the pick and roll incessantly. The vast majority of scores by their playoff opponents happened when they involved Towns in the pick and roll. Of course, if you were able to combine both Brunson and Towns in this action, it really became a problem. But Towns was the main target, and the only way to mitigate that wasn't by somehow transforming him into a good defender. It was by getting him to create a lot more points when the Knicks had the ball. If he is giving up 24 points a game on one end, but creating 32 points for you on offense, then it's a net positive and you can still get deep into the playoffs. But allowing the offense to stagnate as much as it did deeper into the playoffs meant Cat suddenly was an albatross around the Knicks' neck, not getting enough opportunities, save for a couple of dominant fourth quarters, to overcome his liabilities. I would have thought adding Mitchell Robinson to lineups alongside Cat would have really helped him by covering for any defensive breakdowns. But it shocked me to see the final numbers for the playoffs, particularly the defensive rating. Ironically, the biggest boost they got from putting Robinson in the starting lineup was offensively, primarily due to his superhuman ability to grab offensive rebounds. Alternatively, as a coach, you need to come up with solutions to protect bad defenders, and I wish I could show you some clips of the Knicks trying to play zone to protect Cat and Brunson, but there are virtually no possessions of it. A couple of times this season, they played it on baseline out of bounds plays, but that was it. And in the modern game, if you're not willing to experiment with some zones, especially if you've got multiple weak points, it becomes a red flag. The irony is that Tibbs practically invented ice defense, the method all teams employ to force the ball handler away from the screen, which essentially turns your man into a zone. I even interviewed Coach Thibodeau about ice defense, and I want to make one thing clear. Tibbs' knowledge of the game is as profound as any coach you'll ever come across.
The more that we can keep it on one side, the better. And it's always the ball, the paint, and then react out to cover the line. Then you have to finish your defense by challenging shots and rebounding. So it requires you to do more than one thing and tie everybody together.
Let's get into some specific coaching issues that could have led to management's decision. If we accept that he lost his job because they lost to the Pacers, then we need only look at the Game 1 meltdown as the beginning of the end. It wasn't just Halliburton hitting an absolutely insane, once-in-a-lifetime shot that got them in overtime. The Knicks had a 6-point lead with 45 seconds left and make a big mental error by attacking the basket quick for a layup. Well-coached teams know they need to run the clock down in this situation. As a result of this mistake, they are cross-matched in transition, and that means Towns gets hung up on a drag screen and OG doesn't realize it till it's way too late. It got worse when they had a timeout to discuss the strategy of not shooting too quickly, and yet they make the same mistake again. The only way you lose this game is if you shoot too quickly, and I know it's a layup, but stuff like this happens, and it's on the coach to make sure his players don't do it. When they screw up their defensive positioning on this three, Thibodeau then burns his last timeout despite knowing the Pacers were going to have to foul. Getting Robinson out was one imperative for sure, but I don't think it's unreasonable to assume they could both get the ball in bounds and not throw it to Mitch. This sideline out of bounds play was either a bad design by Tibbs or OG just decides to run alongside Bridges and blow the whole play up. Either way, this is not how well-coached teams finish games, and the basketball gods punish them by having Cat choke this free throw. And while we will get to the whole fouling up by 3 scenario in a second, it's not a sound strategy when done with more than 10 seconds on the clock because you're giving your opponent an extra possession. And then they were completely unprepared to inbound the ball under pressure. Hart is panic signaling for someone to come back to the ball, while Brunson ends up getting away with a huge mistake when the Pacers somehow don't have a defender to grab this loose ball. All these things can eventually come back to haunt you, and even though it required some crazy things to happen, of course they did, all because the Knicks allowed them to. Speaking of crazy things that can and will happen, you should try your hand at Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus, it's guaranteed. This year's basketball playoffs are headed towards crowning a first-time champ in more than 50 years. Don't miss your last chance to cash in on history with Prize Picks. Pick more or less on player stats like points, rebounds, assists, and more for your shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today. On Prize Picks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports. Combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Now, let's not forget that there were some fortunate things that helped the Knicks in the Detroit series. This was way too close to being a backcourt violation, and at the very end of Game 4, Hart clearly fouls Hardaway for the game-winning free throws. Just imagine if the Pistons win this game like they should have, and win Game 5 on the road, the Tibbs decision might have happened sooner. It didn't help that we saw a mass confusion at the end of Game 5, helped by the referees to some extent, but you shouldn't see this type of indecision at the end of a playoff game, especially in an obvious intentional missed free throw situation where you'd want Mitchell Robinson in. Going back and forth between the court and the bench clearly frustrated Robinson and probably added another thing to the Tibbs list. Fouling up by 3 is always a big bone of contention for me, and we saw it hurt them last year in the playoffs when they didn't foul Maxey, who tied it up as the Sixers won in overtime.
In those situations, you talk about what you want to do there out of timeouts. Josh has got 2 free throws, it's 2, so you have to, communicate what your decisions are. We could have done better in that situation, and we will. Well, we could have. That's, but we'll leave it at that.
Tibbs seemed to be intimating that he told them to foul in that situation, but it's just as bad for the coach if he tells his guys something and then they don't execute it. It happened again this year when they allowed Tatum to dribble the ball up the court and step back into a good look to tie it.
It's time in situation. They inbounded the ball quickly. He's coming at us, and then if he's in the shooting motion, you're giving him the 3 shots. So it's, it wasn't off a dead ball situation.
But if his players need a timeout for them to know they should foul up by 3, then that's not a team quite ready to take the ultimate step towards a title. And finally, the lineup data indicates they weren't putting the right 5-man lineups on the floor, wanting to cling to what was comfortable versus making quick adjustments on the fly to find more optimal combinations. We mentioned inserting Robinson into the starting lineup after falling down 2-0 to the Pacers, but Deuce McBride was another guy who was a vital part of the rotation all season long, then slowly disappeared as the series wore on. It was bizarre to see the second most played lineup in the regular season barely get used in the playoffs at all. And I get it, a lineup without Brunson won't get used that much when Tibbs shortens his rotations, but to only use it in 5 of the 18 total games? What's the point of the regular season then? And there was another lineup that seemed to unlock another level for them by subbing McBride in for Josh Hart alongside the rest of the starters. While the numbers looked very good in the regular season in a very small sample size, they were even more effective in the playoffs, but in the most random of opportunities. The biggest chance during Game 6 when this group helped break the game open in a series-clinching victory. But we never saw this lineup again, except for one lone possession at the end of the third quarter of Game 2, when shooters all around Brunson gave him the space to uncork this beauty of a legal one-footed step-through. When he finally did make some radical changes by finding minutes for Shaman and Wright, who suddenly started helping the team profoundly, it was too little too late. Any team that loses the first 2 games at home is most likely going to lose the series, and in Thibodeau's case, his job as well.